I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hopefully you had yourself a great week. It was a busy one when it comes to trying to cover all the things that happen in agriculture, but we're going to try to do our best today to get to as much as possible. We're going to hear from Derek Robinson of Mash Strategy. He is out of Calgary, Alberta, and actually also worked in Saskatchewan for Premier Wall in his communications department. He's going to talk about why he thinks the cabinet shuffle happened this week, and what does it mean now that there's multiple polls showing that the Conservatives are 10 points ahead of the Trudeau Liberals. We're also going to hear from Alana Koch, farmer from Saskatchewan, also definitely, she's a big part of agriculture in Saskatchewan. She's also chair of the Field of Dreams event that happened last week in Saskatoon, connected to Ag in Motion. They raised a lot of money. We're going to hear from her on that. We've got John Dreidger from Leftfield Commodity Research to talk about the Saskatchewan crop report. Things are sliding sideways. And then we'll talk a little bit about, we'll reflect on one of the things that happened in the cabinet shuffle this week, which was Minister Bobo is out as Minister of Agriculture, and we'll get some reaction to that. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's get to the cabinet shuffle. I had a chance to catch up with Derek Robinson of Mash Strategy to talk about why is this shuffle happening now. Here's our conversation. Why do you think the Liberal Party did this now?
Well, if you say battle of inches, I think they're worried about being behind by several hundred yards at this point. In fact, I would say they're behind by 10 points in the polls that came out from Abacus and Leger. Very good pollsters. It has the Liberals 10 points behind the Conservatives at a spot they've never really been at. Trudeau's popularity and his negatives are not doing very well right now at all. And so this is a Liberal government that's in trouble and in desperate need of a reset. So they are trying to do something to kickstart the government's popularity again. They're behind on a lot of issues, and I think they're really worried.
Now, what's kind of confusing, like I get that, but at the end of the day, Canadian politics seems to always come down to the leader. Like if you ask the average Canadian, who is the minister of, well, for sure, agriculture, that's going to come up with a, a bit of a pause. But, even if you said, hey, who's the finance minister? And of course, that's Chrystia Freeland, a high profile minister. A lot of Canadians probably can't even do that, but they know that it's Justin Trudeau as prime minister. So do you think there's any sort of pressure here for a leadership change, or is it basically a situation at this point where it's his call? He leaves when he wants to.
He's still definitely the leader. I think there's no changing that in the near future. I know there's rumblings in the Liberal caucus that how long can we withstand Trudeau if his popularity keeps dropping? There's sort of a thing in politics anywhere that if you're in for a certain period of time, people just get tired of looking at you. They get tired of hearing about you. Trudeau's been in power for almost 8 years. He's been around the political scene for a long time. And over time, people just don't want you anymore. They just want change. And I guarantee the Liberals are polling right now, and they're looking at the desire for change in Canadian politics, and it is growing every single day right now. And Trudeau may not have a whole bunch of time left. So this is still his party. He's running the show, but he's in desperate need of a reset. So what you saw this week is he shifted about 2/3 of cabinet, a massive shuffle. This is not just, there's a couple people in, a couple people out. This is like a massive overhaul. And so he's hoping to, say, hey, we got this great new team. Even though I'm still here and you don't like me very much, maybe this great new team is going to really shine and help you out, because we've been kind of getting hammered on housing affordability and crime. And his ministers have actually been very bad on those files. They've been underperforming, and they've kind of embarrassed him in a lot of ways. So I think that's part of the change as well. But this is still definitely his party, and he's running the show. But you're right. He's still the first minister. He's the main person, and people vote in Canadian politics mostly for the leader in the party. About 80% of the time, it's leader and party. So until that changes, we don't know if Trudeau's going to survive or not.
There is some irony to the fact that this kind of feels like what happened to former Prime Minister Harper. that, people, it wasn't there was a vote for Trudeau, but it was very much like, you're tired. This has been a great run, and it's over. And there feels, and it just feels qualitatively like that's kind of where we are here. You worked for Brad Wall in Saskatchewan, and he was the opposite, where he kind of left on his own terms. I'm good with it. It's time for somebody else to carry the torch. It's a little bit of a more ceremonial leave if you do it that way, I think.
You're right. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Politicians are very bad at going out when they should. So if Trudeau was smart, he'd probably go over right now. A new leader would have 2 years to kind of get established and fight the next election, or maybe they want to call the election sooner. But a lot of politicians, I was a big fan of Mr. Harper, but he didn't go out when he should have. He should have probably resigned a couple years earlier, got a new leader in there. And that's exactly what Brad Wall did. And I don't see Trudeau doing that. I feel like he's going to ride this out to the end. He's also pretty resilient, this guy. If you think about it, he's had a lot of scandal, a lot of problems in government, and his brand has withstood a lot of negativity. I've heard a lot in Canadian politics where it's every day in government is like putting a rock in your backpack. And over time, issues come up, scandals come up, whether they're your fault or not. You add a rock to that backpack, and sometimes the backpack just gets too heavy to carry, and governments end up just defeating themselves. And so whoever's kind of next in line, in this case, it'd probably be the Conservatives. If they can position themselves as a good alternative, then you probably have a new government whenever the next election is called.
Let's play a little bit of a game. You're a political strategist. You work with a lot of politicians on the Conservative side of the aisle. Let's just pretend all of a sudden that you got a call from Prime Minister Trudeau. He wants to stay. He is going to stay. And he said, "Hey, Derek, help me out here. What should I do?" What kind of advice would you give him?
I had actually, the cabinet shuffle I thought was a great idea for him. So if you saw what he did online, he made all these great videos about this new team and how this new energy is going to do this, and we're going to switch things around. And the one thing I think he's really struggling with is admitting that there's a problem. So I see the Liberal Party and I see Justin Trudeau saying, "Hey, we have the lowest inflation in the G7." But the problem is people aren't believing you in that. So they are looking at their carbon tax bill, and they're looking at the price of bread, and they're looking at the price of gasoline and the price of a new vehicle and all these different things. And he's not accepting reality. So people are feeling pain, and he's not identifying with their pain. If he really wanted to do something different, he could stop being an environmental activist and try to start being a prime minister for the economy and for affordability for Canadians. That would be probably my best advice for him.
We've been talking to Derek Robinson. He is CEO of MASH Strategy based out of Calgary. Derek, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Shaun.
You can send me your feedback. Do you think this cabinet shuffle works? Does this change the perception that Canadians will have of this government? Or are opinions kind of sitting in concrete? They're solidified. I go back 6 months ago, I probably would have said, they're solidified. But clearly there's some movement. We're seeing in these polls where the Conservatives have taken a 10-point lead, according to Abacus data. I talk to David Coletto often in interviews for RealAgriculture.com, and he's a great pollster. He's legit, and he's seeing this. So you kind of have to wonder, maybe there's a crack here. Maybe there is a bit of an opening for opinions to change and shift. But you know what? As easy as that 10%, and it hasn't been easy, but as easy as it is swung towards the Conservatives, there's still a long time potentially between now and fall of 25, because the Liberals could wait till fall of 25 to call an election. That 10% could be lost. Those 10 points could be gone. Poof. So there's time for, and here's what one of the things I wonder is that Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives have been so used in scraping and clawing and trying to, basically cut that lead for the Liberals. Now that they're in front in the polls, do they change tactic? Or do they still stick with the strategy that they've been using up until this point? That's something kind of that interests me, that I'm watching very closely. But, this is a very interesting time. We'll have to see. And, of course, we have a new Minister of Agriculture, Lawrence MacAulay. And Minister Bobo is out. I got some thoughts about that later on in the program. But coming up next, we're going to talk to Alana Koch. We want to talk about the Field of Dreams event. Saskatchewan raised a lot of money for STARS, a very important cause, and we'll hear all about it when we come back. You're listening to 980 CGME and 650 CKOM.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to realagriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Joining us right now on RealAg on the Weekend is Alana Koch. She is a farmer from Edenwald, but also chair of the Field of Stars committee that had a very successful event last week connected to the Ag in Motion show. Alana, great to chat with you.
Thanks so much for having me on, Shaun.
Okay, so tell us about Field of Stars, because, you know, I actually have heard from a few people that this is an amazing event, as per usual. And it really brought out the, maybe put it this way, the who's who in agriculture. Everybody got together, raised a big chunk of money, and it was an incredible success. So tell us about the event.
Yeah, well, it was an amazing event, Shaun. I mean, it just speaks to the generosity of the agriculture community, and the gathering was outstanding. As you said, it was a bit of a who's who in the room, and such an amazing vibe. It was electric, with energy and with real commitment and dedication to kind of what STARS is all about, which is, of course, to provide critical care for Saskatchewan, but especially for rural Saskatchewan, where, you know, those helicopters are life-saving. And of course, rural Saskatchewan is where agriculture lives. So it really makes sense for agriculture to give back. So this year was the 6th annual Field of Stars event. In total, you know, over the full 6 years, we've raised $2,330,000, which is amazing to think about what agriculture has given back. Yeah.
Just at this event?
No. Over the 6 years of the event, $2.3 million.
That's crazy. That's amazing.
It is amazing. And this year we thought, you know, we were really ambitious as a committee. You know what? We're going to push ourselves and really stretch. And so we set this ambitious goal of raising $500,000, and we exceeded that. We have raised over $530,000 just from this year's event. So, I mean, phenomenal. And only because of the generosity of, you know, so many sponsors, donors, people who pledged, people who gave auction items, both the live auction and silent auction items. And then the people that came to the event were buying raffle tickets and 50-50. And, you know, it was really an amazing event. And, you know, a bit of a change this year, because we've always had it on site at Ag in Motion, which is a really cool event outdoors. But just because of some logistical and weather challenges that we faced in the last couple of years, we thought, you know what, we're going to switch it up. And we did a Field of Stars campaign over the full 3 days of Ag in Motion, so still affiliated with Ag in Motion, but we moved the event indoors to Prairie Land in Saskatoon. And so it was a kind of a win-win. And so that event, plus the 3 days at Ag in Motion, selling raffle tickets and all the other things that some of the exhibitors at Ag in Motion did to support STARS, has totaled in, you know, over that $530,000 this year.
That's congratulations. That is tremendous. And, you know, I have in the past 6 weeks done 3 tours for different stuff I'm doing, driven through rural Saskatchewan. And it really hits home as you're driving, whether that's across number 1 or on one of the side roads. Saskatchewan's a very remote place. And I mean that in the most serious way, where, like, if you need to get to one of the major hospitals in Saskatoon or Regina, you could be a long ways, and that could be really, truly the difference between life or death. And
so true.
STARS is critical.
True, Shaun. Absolutely. I mean, we're the land of the living skies, and we've got big acres and big spaces between, where people live and certainly the centers that provide healthcare. So STARS is just so vital with that critical care medical service, and it truly does save lives. And, so the people that gave for this event have given for the last events, or people that just give generally to STARS, really are saving lives by providing the resources to STARS and the amazing team that's at STARS to provide that critical care. It's a big change since STARS has been established in Western Canada. It really is, life-saving. And so whatever we can do to support, of course, it's a great cause.
And you had a concert. Was it Doc Walker?
It was, and they were amazing. People were dancing all night. I mean, it was just such a great vibe. They were so awesome, and it was the most dancers we had on the floor. So I think that speaks to the kind of entertainment that Doc Walker provided.
Oh, great stuff. So, how do you top it next year? What happens with a lot of this stuff is that everybody's like, oh, we'll do it. We'll get to work on it next year. And that seems like for all the participants, it's a long ways away. But for the organizers, and yourself as the chair, the work kind of starts now. So have you already started to think about next year?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we're having our debrief meeting here in a couple of weeks. I've asked the committee members to think about, all the bouquets for what went really well, but maybe some of the beefs as far as, what we could make even better, so that we can begin sort of making notes and making plans for next year's event. Of course, us as a committee of volunteers from the agriculture community, we've got work to do to think about next year's event, and we'll really get going probably starting in January, where we really double down and get rolling. But we stay sort of, connected up until then. But of course, it's the team at STARS, in donor relations and stakeholder relations. Some of the crew there, Tammy and Sherry and others, that really, right away. I mean, I saw them today. I stopped in at the hangar at the STARS hangar in Saskatoon by the Saskatoon airport, and they're already thinking about next year. And we got talking about ideas, and so we're already thinking about next year, and we're hoping it'll be bigger and better. And of course, it's all about raising money. So hopefully we can exceed, we'll probably set a slightly more ambitious goal. That's the way we achieve bigger things, is to stretch ourselves. And so we'll be looking for that next year.
Absolutely. And I'm sure there are lots of listeners here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM on Real Agriculture as well that somehow are connected to somebody, and maybe it's even themselves, where STARS has saved a life. So this is, there's fundraising for important causes, and then there's fundraising for big causes. And STARS is definitely on that list for people that are living in remote areas. So Alana, thanks so much for joining us, and great job on the event. It's a great, important work.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about STARS. Really appreciate it, Shaun.
And hey, I got you. How are the crops looking?
You know what? We're feeling really fortunate. Our crops are in good shape. We had some early moisture. We can always use a little more, but we've had some somewhat regular rains, and we're feeling very fortunate. I know that's not the case in very many places, so we're looking to have a very decent crop this year.
Well, I ran into your husband Jerry at Egg in Motion, and it sounds like the crops around Edenwald are doing better than the riders. Is that a fair and accurate statement?
Yeah, I guess so, Shaun. True statement right now. We hope that'll turn around. We're going to the Rider game on August 6th, so hopefully we see some better results.
Good stuff. Well, I better be careful what I say there. I'll have everybody listening here on the radio station all mad. Alana, thanks so much. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, take care, Shaun. Thanks so much.
We'll be back with more of Real Ag on the Weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM right after this.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg on the weekend. The Saskatchewan crop report was out this week, and things are on the slide downwards. We're looking at topsoil moisture at 15% adequate across the province now, 46% short, and 37% very short. So this is a province in pretty desperate need of some rain, and time is kind of running out. Maybe in some areas even over. But if you look at the crop conditions, spring wheat, 24% poor to very poor. Durum, 51% in the poor to very poor. You look at canola, only 3% excellent, with 23% poor to very poor. 32% good. So that was a number that's a little bit higher than I thought. That's the same on spring wheat, 33% good with only 2% excellent. So this is definitely on the decline. Now, to get the reaction to it, I wanted to talk to John Dreidger of Leftfield Commodity Research to see how this impacts the markets and the overall production number. Here is my conversation with John Dreidger of Leftfield Commodity Research.
I'm doing fine. How are you, Shaun?
Doing great. Not so great is the crop conditions in Saskatchewan. There are there's a lot of acres in Western Canada that are really under significant stress. And Saskatchewan is a good example where there's a good portion of the province that started out decently in 23, and we have slid, high heat, lack of rainfall over a general large, widespread area. And this week's crop condition report has really showcased that slide continues.
Yeah, we really saw it. And so, for viewers that might not be familiar, it was Saskatchewan puts out a crop rating every 2 weeks, so there's been a two week lag. And so, we had been seeing, of course, the lack of rain is something we've been tracking for a long time, and it's been well known. But one of the things that, at least until recently, I think that it helped at least buffer a little bit some of the impacts is that temperatures had actually been fairly cool. And so crops had maybe not been deteriorating in the way that you might expect given the lack of rainfall. And so with this latest crop report, we saw a pretty substantial drop over the course of 2 weeks. And I think, to be honest, there's certainly places that actually maybe received some rain. But I think the difference is that now we actually have seen kind of those temperatures crank back up. And so kind of the cumulative rainfall deficit now with some higher temperatures, and we're seeing some pretty significant drops, say, compared to 2 weeks ago, for example, for a lot of crops. And so, yeah, it's starting to show up, I guess, in a more impactful way, in a more significant way in the crop condition ratings, even though they already were trending lower.
So what does this do for crop production estimates? Are you going to crank down, or maybe crank is the wrong way to put it? Are you going to start to dial back? Well, maybe you are going to crank. I don't know. My guess is you're going to start to tick that dial back a little bit when it comes to some of your estimates, especially on a crop like canola, I would think.
Yeah, certainly, Shaun. And to be honest, I guess as we're chatting here, it was just a couple hours ago when the ratings came out. And so we're still just kind of digesting and thinking through it a little bit. And especially since they dropped a little bit more than we expected. So, I guess the question is, crank might almost be a strong enough word. I don't know if we're exactly to that point. But certainly with a sharp drop like that, we had already been walking our yields down over the last couple of weeks just because of the dryness. We'd been a little cautious about being too aggressive too soon. And again, the cooler temperatures have helped. There was maybe some rain in the forecast in some regions. Was that going to make a bit of a difference in stabilizing conditions? And at least in terms of Saskatchewan specifically, that hasn't really been the case. And so we maybe got a little bit of catching up to do to the downside. the hard part, I guess, is we think through it, and of course, Shaun, you're in Alberta, so you have a better sense of this, maybe being on the ground than we do. But you have parts of Alberta that are just a wreck, and then you have parts of Alberta that are actually not that bad and look pretty okay. And so just there's a lot of variability out there, I guess, is kind of when we think not just of Saskatchewan but across Western Canada. And even just in local areas. And we were chatting previously about, a farmer who had won the rain shower lottery, and some places get rain and don't, even in a small local area. That's really hard to try and get a sense of what do you do from a national yield perspective. But having said that, obviously Saskatchewan is the largest province. The ratings are going down. That's going to have a direct impact on overall average yields.
Yeah. And, a lot of attention is paid, of course, to spring wheat and to canola. And that sucks up a lot of the oxygen in the room when we talk about production numbers. But what about pulse crops? That's one that doesn't get necessarily the widespread attention, but very, very important to the farmer's rotation and farmer's cash flow. What kind of how has all of this weather and crop condition impacted that production number, do you think?
Well, those have been coming down as well. And in the case of peas, in the case of lentils, for example, in Saskatchewan, a similar trend to everything else. And I think there's a couple parts to that. I mean, one, certainly, there's been dryness in a widespread area, so that's not a surprise. But if you also think about the areas that have maybe been, the driest, the hardest hit, for example, Southwest Saskatchewan, Western Saskatchewan, some of those parts, of course, these are big pulse areas as well. So it's not just the dryness in aggregate, but an element of concentration in some areas where where pulses are growing. So for example, in the case of lentils, we're actually not that far above 2021 levels on a good excellent rating. In the case of peas, similar as well. So they've been hit just like everything else. And of course, Saskatchewan is such an enormously important producer of all crops, but particularly pulses.
Yeah, and I think it was you and I chatting about maybe 3 weeks ago. And I had said that, what is the 2023 production number? And I've been describing it to people as this is really scientific. Somewhere between 21 and 22, but a little bit closer to 22. Has that changed in the past 3 weeks? Are we getting closer to 21? Because I don't want to doomsday this, because I'm not chasing, viral hits here and views and saying, RealAgriculture says, or John Dreidger says 21, that's where we're headed. But is that kind of where we're trending towards?
Well, and it's going to vary a little bit by crop again, Shaun. And so, for example, something like durum, which is really concentrated in the areas that have been hit the worst. You think about, again, southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan, western Saskatchewan. We're not down to 2021 levels in terms of our yield estimates, but we're not like that far off. So if you think about, between 21 and 22, well, something like durum, we're kind of sliding closer to 21 than we are to 22. But for some other crops, that might not necessarily be the case. And again, it depends a little bit, maybe concentration of where some crops are growing and that sort of thing. So somewhere between the two is a reasonable, kind of guesstimate, if you will. But how close to which or the other, that's going to vary a little bit by crop. There are some that aren't that far off. Or, for example, something like in the case of oats, maybe you can get down to 21 levels, but the massive sharp drop in acres that, production might end up even being smaller in aggregate by the time all is said and done. Yields are not going to be down to those levels, but acres are way down. So again, you sort of got to peel apart each crop individually to kind of try and get a sense of what the story might be.
Yeah, well, on that oats, this is a good way to maybe help cure some of that carryout from 22 is low acres and bad and low yield per acre. That's a good way to solve some of those supply issues for sure. And I think it's really on canola, it's really easy to get heavily negative. But you have to keep in your mind that crop is, until those combines roll, it's really hard. Like you're just, sort of stabbing in the dark or, floating a wet finger in the wind, trying to figure out which way that yield's going to go. It's not going to be great, but I just like 21. There was people that were like super, 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 super low, and they were kind of proven wrong, even in the 21 drought. So I'm looking forward to the combines in the field and seeing what that canola number actually is.
Yeah, no, I agree, Shaun, and that's one of the. I mean, there's a few things. One, certainly, it's not necessarily a direct, linear relationship between crop rating and final yield. And so that's one of the things that's really hard to wrestle with. And again, with some crops, it's more difficult than others. I think canola is notoriously difficult to try and anticipate what yields are going to be. And just over the years, how many times have we chatted with farm clients? So what do you think a crop is? Well, they think it's going to be yield X. And by the time the combines get rolling, which might only be a week later, and they might be out like crazy. And that's a farmer that knows their own field, they know their land, they know their crop. You try and do that on a national basis, it's really difficult. So you can kind of get some sense, some leaning, but the sort of pound your fist saying, oh, the conditions are X and therefore the crop is size Y. That's pretty tough, and probably more so for canola than maybe anything.
Exactly. Hey, John, thanks for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. All the best to you.
Yep. Thanks, Shaun.
When we come back on RealAg on the weekend, we're going to talk about what's the signal, the message, the significance of Minister Bibeau moving out of agriculture and Lawrence McCauley back in. We'll get to it when we come back. You're listening to RealAg on the weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Definitely the biggest mainstream news story this week in Canada was probably the cabinet shuffle, where we saw 2/3, as Derek Robinson of Mass Strategy described earlier, 2/3 of the cabinet was shuffled. This is definitely a bit of a rebrand going on. I think for us in agriculture, the biggest thing that got a lot of focus is the fact that, to a lot of people's surprise, like I had done a bunch of research prior to the announcement. Everybody kind of thought that Minister Bibeau, Marie-Claude Bibeau, was staying as the Minister of Agriculture. And to be quite honest, you may not agree with her politics, but a lot of people I talked to inside the Ottawa bubble were okay with that. They were thinking that, hey, I heard this a lot. I'm paraphrasing. I don't agree with her all the time, but I know where she comes from and I know where she stands. And she's fine. There's no real big substitutes waiting in the wings. Now, there are substitutes. I had mentioned a story. Frank Drouin is one. Cody Blois was another. But actually, neither of those got any sort of cabinet look. So then the news comes down, and she's out. And it was funny. About a minute before the announcement was made, my phone blew up because word had gotten out. Bibeau was out. Now, what I didn't hear is Lawrence McCauley is back. And when it was announced on CBC, as I was watching the live feed while I was getting ready for RealAg Radio, I had to do a real double take. I had to do a bit of a head shake, wipe my eyes, do the shake my head. What? Yeah, so Lawrence McCauley is back in that seat. And he was ag minister from 15, basically from the Trudeau, the first, when Trudeau became prime minister, he named Lawrence McCauley. And then in March of 19, he was shifted out to Veterans Affairs. And Marie-Claude Bibeau, a female from Quebec in a rural riding, something that there's a lot of political reasons for that. And she's been there ever since. And she's out and Lawrence is in. So the reaction to Lawrence McCauley being the ag minister is, Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture put it really well on Friday's show of RealAg Radio. that this is a bit of a signal that, there wasn't a lot of mainstream coverage at all of, like, as if the ag ministry doesn't even exist. Second of all, where does ag sit? This seems to be, based on this appointment, to be more of a posting of, like, it's like you're the ambassador to England for Canada, or you're going to be the ambassador to the U.S. for Canada. This is kind of like, hey, it's like a posting. It's a position of diplomacy. It's a diplomat position, as opposed to being what we used to consider it to be. Now, I think a lot of people think back to, remember Minister Ritz, right? He fought for farmers. Okay, now that's how a lot of Western Canadian farmers would think about it. And there's some farmers in Ontario that don't think very highly of Mr. Ritz, and that has to do with some fighting over RMPs and business risk management. But if you think about how Minister Ritz rolled in his job, it was very much fighting. He fought very much to get rid of the board, right? And so farmers view that as, hey, he's fighting for us. The position has really slid into one more of not necessarily representing the industry and farmers and ranchers, but it's more now about they're a liaison. They're a liaison of the government to the farmers. And that's what the position has really shifted to. And I'm not sure I'm not saying it's right. What I'm saying is I'm not quite sure that everybody has really truly accepted that at this point. It kind of is what it is. And there's some of the provinces, this is how it is in conservative governments too, people. It's just that farmers tend to more politically align with conservative governments, so they don't notice it as much. But I do see it as a media person that's to deal with politicians and ministers on both sides of the aisle. I can tell you it does exist. It does exist. So where do we go from here? What can we expect? Well, there's some things that Minister Bowe did not get to in her time as the minister. One is the Grain Act review. That's not done. That's like the never-ending story. We got seed regulatory modernization. Horse slaughter is another thing that was not completed and finished. So there are some things for Mr. McCauley to work on. Here's the thing. There were times where Minister Bowe would get into, she would stick up for herself, and there'd be some battles. Okay, you may not see those out in the public, but there were some battles behind the scenes. That's not Lawrence McCauley. He is somebody that is he's a peacekeeper for sure, and somebody I don't expect to see any big swings. That's not what we're going to see at this time, and it's going to be the industry trying to sort out how they go about things differently, because they're two different people. There's two different personalities. And I also think that this is a time where the Ministry of AAFC needs to make sure they've got a strong bench of bureaucrats to support. And this was the same, I believe the same thing wholeheartedly when it came to Minister Bowe, needing to increase the depth of the bench, to make sure there are bureaucrats around the minister to assist in making sure some of these files move forward. It's definitely a change. I wouldn't say it's a change that a lot of people in ag circles around Ottawa are super excited about, but they also know that they have to work with the minister and make sure that he understands where they're coming from on all these different files. So it's definitely going to be a very interesting, challenging time for sure, up until whatever the next election is. And I still maintain my flag I'm planting on the ground is Q1 of 24. I think we're going to have a spring election, but they have until fall of 25. So it really depends on how long the NDP and the Liberals can hold together in this pact and govern the way that they have been. Give me your feedback, Haney at RealAgriculture.com, or the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. What do you think? What do you think of the legacy will be for Mr. Bowe? What do you think about Lawrence McCauley being back as the Minister of Agriculture, or anything else that's on your mind? Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed RealAg on the weekend, and we'll chat again with you next week. Cheers, everybody.